Have you ever noticed that the quality you spend the most energy trying to hide is also the one that keeps returning in different forms, almost as if your own mind refuses to let you forget it? Perhaps it appears in the relationships that leave you questioning your worth. Perhaps it hides behind your hesitation whenever an opportunity arrives. Or perhaps it whispers in the silence after everyone has gone to sleep, when no applause, no achievements, and no carefully crafted identity can distract you from that uncomfortable feeling that something inside you remains unseen. Now consider a possibility that may completely overturn everything you have believed about yourself. What if the part of you that you secretly despise is not your greatest obstacle? What if it is your greatest source of power? Most people have been taught that personal growth means removing flaws. Fix your anxiety, eliminate your insecurity, silence your anger, suppress your obsession. Become more acceptable, become easier to understand, become less intense, less emotional, less different. But what if this advice has been pointing you in the wrong direction all along? What if every attempt to erase your imperfections has also erased a piece of your vitality? Imagine someone spending years trying to polish a stone because they believe it is worthless, never realizing that beneath its rough surface lies solid gold. That is how countless people treat their own minds. They polish, they hide, they apologize.
They edit themselves into someone who receives approval while slowly losing contact with the force that once made them alive.
And this is where one of the deepest psychological truths begins to reveal itself. The qualities you reject do not disappear. They simply move underground. The mind never wastes energy. It merely redirects it. Every emotion that is denied seeks another doorway. Every instinct that is imprisoned eventually learns how to escape. Sometimes it escapes through anxiety. Sometimes through self-sabotage. Sometimes through perfectionism. Sometimes through depression. Sometimes through unexplained exhaustion. You believe you are tired because life is demanding. But what if you are tired because you are carrying an invisible performance every moment of your existence? Think about that. How much energy does it take to constantly monitor your words before speaking? How much energy does it take to suppress anger until it transforms into resentment? How much energy does it take to pretend confidence while secretly fearing rejection? How much energy does it take to smile when your soul wants to scream? Your nervous system pays for every disguise. It pays in fatigue, it pays in confusion, it pays in creative paralysis. Modern life has perfected this performance. Never before have human beings possessed such extraordinary tools for presenting idealized versions of themselves. Every photograph can be filtered, every sentence carefully rewritten, every failure deleted, every insecurity hidden beneath another carefully chosen image. The world applauds appearances. Algorithms reward perfection. Attention flows towards certainty. Confidence becomes a product. Authenticity becomes marketing. And slowly, almost without noticing, people stop asking who they truly are. Instead, they ask something much more dangerous. Who should I appear to be? Notice how subtle that shift is. One question creates freedom. The other creates imprisonment. Because the moment your identity depends upon maintaining an image, your own personality becomes a prison guard. You wake each morning protecting a version of yourself that no longer feels real. You become afraid of making mistakes, afraid of changing, afraid of being misunderstood, afraid of discovering something inside yourself that doesn't fit the character you have spent years constructing. This invisible character has an ancient psychological name: the persona. It is not evil. It is necessary. Every civilization requires masks. Every profession demands certain roles. Parents behave differently from teachers, doctors differently from musicians, leaders differently from children. The persona allows society to function. But problems begin when the mask becomes more familiar than the face beneath it. Something extraordinary happens when this occurs. The more perfect the mask becomes, the more powerful the hidden self grows beneath it. Imagine placing a beach ball underwater. At first it seems easy, but every second requires pressure. You cannot relax, you cannot let go, because the moment your grip weakens, the ball explodes upward with surprising force. The mind works in exactly the same way. Every quality you suppress demands psychological energy. The longer it remains hidden, the stronger its eventual return. This explains something that confuses many people. Why do individuals who appear calm suddenly explode with rage? Why do those who preach kindness sometimes become unexpectedly cruel? Why do people obsessed with appearing successful secretly feel like frauds? Why does someone who seems emotionally detached eventually collapse into overwhelming loneliness? Because what is buried never dies. It waits, it gathers pressure, it becomes heavier, and eventually it demands recognition. Perhaps this is happening inside you even now. Perhaps there is a part of yourself knocking softly beneath consciousness, not asking to destroy your life, simply asking to be seen. Yet fear immediately appears, because we assume that acknowledging humans means becoming controlled by them. But awareness does not create chaos. Unawareness does. The storm you refuse to observe is the storm that eventually controls your direction. Close your eyes for a moment in your imagination. Picture yourself standing before a locked door deep inside an ancient house. You have walked past this door thousands of times. You know something lives behind it. You hear distant echoes, sometimes whispers, sometimes anger, sometimes sadness, sometimes impossible dreams. Yet every time you reach for the handle you stop, not because you know what is inside, but because you don't. The unknown always appears more dangerous than reality. Yet consider another possibility. What if the monster behind that door has been protecting treasure all along? Human beings are fascinating creatures. Children are not born ashamed, they learn shame. A child laughs loudly, someone says, "Be quieter." A child cries openly. Someone says, "Stop being so sensitive." A child becomes curious. Someone says, "Don't ask so many questions." A child becomes ambitious. Someone warns, "Don't be arrogant." A child feels anger. Someone replies, "Good children, don't get angry." Little by little, pieces of the personality are separated from conscious identity, not because they are bad, but because they became inconvenient. Acceptance often arrived with invisible conditions. You may belong. If you hide this, you may receive love. If you silence that, you may fit in. If you become smaller. And children always make the same decision. Belonging feels safer than authenticity. So they sacrifice parts of themselves without realizing the cost. Years pass. Decades pass. The forgotten qualities sink deeper into the unconscious. But something remarkable happens. They do not lose their strength. They mature without guidance. Imagine locking a powerful river behind a dam. The water does not disappear. Pressure increases. Energy accumulates. Eventually that same force becomes capable of generating electricity or destroying entire cities. Power itself is neutral. Direction determines destiny. This is why what you call weakness often contains astonishing amounts of psychological energy, sensitivity. Perhaps you have spent years believing it makes you fragile, yet sensitivity is simply perception without boundaries. The artist calls it inspiration. The healer calls it empathy. The innovator calls it intuition. The poet calls it seeing what others overlook. The weakness was never sensitivity. The weakness was never learning how to guide it. Consider stubbornness. How often has someone criticized your refusal to give up? Yet history's greatest discoveries frequently belong to people others described as impossible. What appears as stubbornness in one environment becomes resilience in another. Consider obsession. Society warns against intensity. Moderation becomes the highest virtue. Yet every masterpiece, every breakthrough, every extraordinary achievement required someone willing to think longer, look deeper, remain focused beyond ordinary endurance. Again, the flaw was not intensity. The flaw was lacking conscious direction. Even anxiety contains hidden intelligence. An anxious mind notices possibilities others ignore. It predicts patterns. It scans environments. It anticipates danger. Without awareness, this ability becomes suffering. With awareness, it becomes extraordinary strategic thinking. The same energy, different relationship. Perhaps this changes the way you see yourself. Perhaps what you have spent years trying to eliminate simply needed refinement instead of rejection. Imagine if every quality inside you arrived as raw material rather than a finished product. Iron is not useful until forged. Coal is not beautiful until transformed. A diamond begins hidden beneath unbearable pressure. Why should human psychology be any different? Maybe your deepest flaw is simply unfinished power. Notice what happens inside your mind as you entertain that possibility. Something relaxes. Something curious awakens. Because your nervous system recognizes hope when it encounters truth. You no longer have to wage war against yourself. You only have to understand yourself. That difference changes everything. Most people live as divided kingdoms. One side constantly judges. The other constantly hides. One side demands perfection. The other quietly accumulates resentment. This internal civil war consumes extraordinary amounts of energy. Imagine if all the soldiers fighting within your own mind suddenly laid down their weapons. Imagine what could be created with that reclaimed energy. Imagine how your voice would sound if it no longer feared exposure. Imagine how your creativity would expand if it no longer required permission. Imagine how relationships would change if you stopped demanding impossible perfection from yourself. Because the greatest prison is rarely built by society. It is built by the invisible belief that only certain parts of you deserve to exist. And once that belief is questioned, something ancient begins to awaken. Not confidence. Something deeper than confidence. Not self-esteem. Something stronger than self-esteem. A quiet authority born from no longer hiding. But there is one hidden obstacle that almost everyone encounters the moment they begin approaching their own shadow. It is so subtle that most people mistake it for wisdom. When in reality, it is fear wearing the mask of logic. Fear has an extraordinary ability to disguise itself as common sense. It rarely announces itself by saying, "I am afraid." Instead it whispers, "Be realistic." It says people like you don't succeed. It says you'll embarrass yourself. It says, "You've always been this way." It says, "Don't risk losing what little acceptance you already have." Listen carefully to that voice. Not because it is telling the truth, but because it is revealing exactly where your hidden energy has been imprisoned. Every excuse has a history. Every hesitation has an origin. Every recurring limitation points toward a forgotten part of yourself waiting to be reclaimed. This is where transformation stops being an inspiring idea and becomes a psychological practice. The question is no longer, how do I remove my weakness? The question becomes, how do I work with it? Imagine holding a lump of unrefined gold. At first glance it looks unimpressive, as heavy, covered in dirt, irregular, heavy. Most people would walk past it, searching for something shinier. Yet, that jeweler immediately recognizes what others overlook. Not because the gold has changed, because perception has. The same shift must happen within your own mind. You are not searching for a new personality. You are becoming a jeweler of your own unconscious. Begin with complete honesty. Not dramatic honesty, not self-punishing honesty, simple observation. Ask yourself a question that almost no one dares to answer. What quality about myself do I spend the most energy trying to hide?
Do not answer too quickly. The unconscious never responds through speed. It responds through silence. Perhaps it is your sensitivity, perhaps your ambition, perhaps your loneliness.
Perhaps your jealousy, perhaps your desire to be admired, perhaps your tendency to question everything. Perhaps your intensity, perhaps your fear of abandonment, perhaps your need for solitude. Whatever appears, do not judge it. Observe it the way an archaeologist brushes dust from an ancient artifact. Curiosity discovers what shame never can. The moment you stop calling something your enemy, it begins revealing its purpose. Suppose your greatest weakness is sensitivity. Instead of suppressing it, ask another question. Where does this ability naturally belong? Sensitivity suffocates inside environments demanding emotional numbness. Yet the same sensitivity becomes extraordinary in art, leadership, counseling, writing, parenting, innovation, and meaningful relationships. Your weakness did not disappear. It found its proper direction. Suppose your weakness is obsessive thinking. For years you may have hated your inability to stop analyzing. But what if your mind was designed for mastery rather than distraction? The problem was never depth. The problem was scattering that depth across 100 fears instead of one meaningful purpose. Imagine redirecting the same obsessive energy toward learning a skill, toward creating something beautiful, toward solving a difficult problem, toward understanding people, toward building a vision so compelling that your mind no longer feeds anxiety but creation. Nothing has been removed. Everything has been redirected. This is psychological alchemy. Not destroying lead, transforming it. Your shadow does not ask for permission, it asks for partnership. There is another exercise that seems deceptively simple. Notice every criticism that affects you more deeply than it should. Someone calls you too emotional, too quiet, too strange, too ambitious, too needy, too independent, too sensitive. Why does one particular criticism linger for days while another disappears within minutes? Because criticism only wounds where identity remains divided. The words themselves possess little power. It is your internal disagreement that gives them life. Imagine two people hearing the exact same insult. One laughs, the other cannot sleep. The difference is not the insult. The difference is integration. When you fully understand a part of yourself, nobody can use it against you. If someone tells a mountain that it is too large, the mountain does not apologize. If someone tells the ocean it contains too much water, the ocean does not shrink. Nature never apologizes for its essence. Only human beings do. And perhaps that is the deepest tragedy of all. We have learned to apologize for the very qualities that make us unique. We say sorry for caring too much. Sorry for asking questions. Sorry for needing space. Sorry for dreaming differently. Sorry for feeling deeply. Sorry for refusing to settle. Every apology quietly tells the unconscious that another piece of itself is unacceptable. The shadow grows stronger every time authenticity is traded for approval. But the opposite is equally true. Every act of conscious acceptance weakens shame. Every moment of honest expression returns energy to the psyche. Every truthful conversation dissolves another invisible prison wall. This reclaimed energy produces something remarkable. Presence. Have you ever met someone who immediately commanded attention without trying? Perhaps they were not the most attractive person, not the loudest, not the wealthiest, yet something about them felt undeniable. People often mistake this for charisma, but charisma is frequently misunderstood. True magnetism is not performance, it is internal unity. You trust people who trust themselves, not because they are perfect, because they are complete. There is no exhausting battle occurring beneath their words. Their emotions move together. Their thoughts align with their actions. Their failures are acknowledged rather than hidden. Their strengths are expressed without arrogance. You sense coherence. And coherence creates influence. This explains why some people can stand before thousands without pretending to be fearless. They have simply stopped wasting energy pretending to be someone else. Even their imperfections become believable. Even their vulnerability creates respect. Even their silence carries weight. Because authenticity possesses a frequency imitation cannot reproduce. Think about the people who have genuinely changed your life. Was it their perfection? Or was it the strange combination of confidence and humanity that made you believe your own struggles could also become meaningful? People are not inspired by flawless lives. They are inspired by integrated lives. This is why many individuals become more powerful after failure than before success. Failure destroys the false identity. Success built upon a false identity only strengthens the prison, but failure forces a question. Who am I when the mask no longer works?
Some never recover from that question.
Others are reborn through it. Perhaps your greatest disappointment was never punishment. Perhaps it was initiation. Perhaps the relationship that ended stripped away the version of yourself built entirely around another person's approval. Perhaps the career that collapsed exposed ambitions that were never truly yours. Perhaps the rejection that humiliated you protected you from becoming trapped inside a life too small for your soul. The unconscious often speaks through endings before it speaks through beginnings. That is why pain frequently arrives before clarity. Not because life is cruel, because transformation requires space. Old identities rarely leave voluntarily. They must crack. The seed cannot become a tree while insisting on remaining a seed. Every meaningful evolution contains destruction. Every genuine beginning contains an ending hidden inside it. This is the rhythm of nature, and therefore the rhythm of psychological growth. Notice something extraordinary. The people who eventually become impossible to intimidate are rarely those who avoided suffering. They are usually those who walked directly into it, not recklessly, not because they enjoyed pain, because they understood something essential. Everything avoided grows larger. Everything faced becomes information. The dragon guarding the treasure exists for a reason. It separates those seeking comfort from those seeking truth. Your shadow is that dragon. Not because it wants to destroy you, because it refuses to surrender its treasure to anyone unwilling to become conscious. Every difficult emotion carries instructions. Every insecurity contains a map. Every fear points toward unexplored territory. Every flaw hides undeveloped genius. The question has never been whether you possess darkness. Every human being does. The real question is whether your darkness serves your awareness or secretly rules your life. Perfection has never been the destination. Wholeness is. Wholeness means allowing compassion to exist beside anger, strength beside vulnerability, logic beside intuition, confidence beside humility, ambition beside peace, light beside shadow. Not choosing one, learning the language of both. This is the quiet rebellion our age desperately needs. A world obsessed with appearances cannot understand someone who values authenticity. A culture addicted to certainty cannot easily comprehend someone comfortable with complexity. Yet history has always belonged to individuals willing to become whole rather than merely acceptable. So today, before you search for another self-improvement strategy, pause. Think of one failure that still follows you, one mistake, one rejection, one insecurity, one characteristic you still wish you could erase. Do not run from it this time. Sit beside it. Ask it what it has been trying to teach you all these years. Listen without judgment. You may discover that what you called your greatest weakness has quietly been waiting to become your greatest teacher. And, perhaps, your greatest teacher has always been preparing you for your greatest work. Because the gold was never missing. It was simply buried beneath years of fear, shame, and misunderstanding. The moment you stop asking, how do I become someone else, and begin asking, how do I become completely myself, you step onto the only path that leads to genuine freedom. Not freedom from your shadow. Freedom because of it. The world does not need another perfect mask. It needs people courageous enough to remove theirs. Because when one human being becomes whole, they silently give everyone around them permission to do the same. And that is how hidden weakness becomes quiet power. That is how rejected pain becomes creative force. That is how the shadow, once feared as your greatest enemy, becomes the very source of the life you were always meant to live.